Thank you for listening to 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. We share the stories of people with a love for Vietnam. My name is Neil Mackay and I'm your host. I love talking to people, but more than anything, I love listening. I've lived in Vietnam since 2016 and started this podcast to know more about the interesting people that live in Saigon, a crazy, bustling, energetic city. Over the seasons, the show has grown and we now talk to people from all over the world who have a Vietnam story to share. In this episode, we have another fantastic guest. We've talked a lot about the plight of the Vietnamese boat people recently. Zoonie Nguyen experienced this directly. She left Saigon with her family on the last day possible, April 30th, 1975. She'll share with you her miraculous escape that eventually led the family to Canada. She returned to Saigon for the first time in 1995 and shares how this changed her life forever. She left her high-flying corporate career to become a speaker, coach, and mentor for women entrepreneurs launching and growing their business. Thank you to Zoonie for joining us and enjoy this episode.
On April 30th, 1975, that morning, all I knew is that we can hear the bombs and it sounded so real, Neil. It was like almost in the back of my home. And so my parents were yelling, was screaming, everybody out, we're going, we're leaving. On that boat for 3 days, 2 nights, under the sun, no water, no food. There was a man next to me who, I don't know if he's a spy or what he was, but he shot himself in the head. I had his brains on me. Every day we had brown rice for morning, lunch, and supper. And, until today, I cannot eat brown rice. I know it's healthier, but I cannot touch brown rice. So we were in that camp for a couple of months. And I remember UNHCR coming in and helping us to see if we can apply to go to another country. I'm the first one to make peace with my past. When I decided to go back, it scared my family. My parents begged me not to go. They said, please don't go. Because they were scared. It was emotional, Neil. We were supposed to be there for 5 weeks, Neil, and we only stayed for 3 weeks. And I'll tell you why. It was so emotional for me to see families after 20 years and them telling me all these horror stories.
Become a member of the 7 Million Bikes community and you'll get free tickets to our events, free 7 Million Bikes face masks, episodes a day early, behind-the-scenes content and invites to special events for community members. The link is in the show description, so check it out and join today. Thank you so much to our existing community members. We look forward to seeing you again soon. This season, we've gifted sponsorship of a Vietnam podcast to 2 amazing charities close to our hearts, the Blue Dragon Children's Foundation in the north and Saigon Children's Charity in the south. Please check out the links in the description to learn more about these amazing organizations and donate if you can. Enjoy the episode and thanks for listening. Thank you for joining us for another episode of a Vietnam podcast. I'm your host, Neil Mackay, and we have another fantastic guest today with an incredible story to share with you. She grew up on Nguyễn Thông Street in Saigon and left on the last day possible, April 30th, 1975, to escape, and went through an exodus from hell on the last boat with 4,000 people. Her boat was sinking, but a miracle happened, and after many months in a refugee camp, she started a new chapter of her life in Canada. Then, in 1995, she decided to come back to visit Saigon, and on that trip, it completely transformed and turned her life around. She is now known as a speaker, coach, and mentor for women entrepreneurs launching and growing their business. My guest today is Zoonie Nguyen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Neil, for inviting me today on your podcast. It's an honor. I am so happy.
You are very, very welcome. It's a crazy world where we make these connections. I made a post on a podcast group, and then suddenly I was connected with you, and they said, you need to speak to Zoonie and share her story. And then we connected by email. So I've been excited to get you on.
Thank you. Thank you, Lourdes. She's an incredible connector, Neil. So I'm very grateful that she connected us.
So look, let's go all the way back to the beginning then. So tell me about how you ended up in Canada, because this is, I didn't tell you, but this is a common topic that's come up more and more lately on the podcast, not in the beginning, but now some of my guests have shared incredible stories about their parents. We had Tracy Nguyen Mang on. I don't know, have you heard the podcast called Vietnamese Boat People?
Yes. Well, after you told me about it, I went to take a look and oh my God, some of I didn't listen to all of them, but it was so emotional for me to listen to some of the stories. I mean, kudos to Tracy Nguyen Mang. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, the work that she's doing to gather all these stories. So I'm not done yet. I have to listen to her episodes and your episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as much of an emotional connection for me, obviously not being Vietnamese, but yeah, I mean, her episodes are so emotional, and it touched me because it is something that kind of unexpectedly came up. Like before I'd moved to Vietnam, like many people, I didn't know the real history of Vietnam or the boat people history. I hadn't read much about it. And so now being exposed to it, and it then guest after guest came on, like lots of VQs. Yeah. And as you probably know, we've had a massive influx of young returning Vietnamese people coming back to explore their roots and their families' roots and things like this. And so through all these conversations, I've learned so much. And then it got to the point where I listened to the Vietnamese Boat People podcast, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'd love to have Tracy on. So that was, for me, it was a big honor to have her on, and we still connect and talk. So that was great. So when Lourdes then introduced us to each other, and then you kind of gave me a brief on your story, I was like, wow. So this really ties into it. We have a lot of regular listeners who will be quite aware of the Vietnamese Boat People plight and what happened. But your story sounds incredible. So you left on the last day possible, April 30th, 1975. So if you're comfortable with that, do you want to tell us more about that?
So April 30th, that morning, just so give you a bit of context. So I was born in Saigon and grew up there for 8 years because at the age of 8, on April 30th, 1975, that morning, all I knew is that we can hear the bombs and it sounded so real, Neil. It was like almost in the back of my home. And so my parents were yelling, was screaming, everybody out, we're going, we're leaving. So I was in my pajamas, right? I was 8 years old in my pajamas, and I have 5 brothers, 2 sisters, there's 8 of us. And all we knew is that we had to get out. And we didn't know what was going on. So my mom took the little ones in the car. There were my aunts, my 3 aunts and 2 babies. I was in a scooter with my sister and my brother, with my dad. So we all split up. And this is crazy. Like I'm talking to you and I'm reliving it because it was so chaotic on the street, and the bombs, and you can hear the gunshots. And all we knew is that my mom said, we're going to meet at the port in Saigon. And she gave us like a specific point. I can't remember the point, but she says, we're all going to split and we're meeting there. Now, where we live on Nguyễn Thông Street, this is about maybe half an hour, 40 minutes from the port of Saigon. And when my mom says that we're going to meet there, okay, we're going to meet there. But when we got there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people trying to push the fence so that we can actually get on the other side, because there was one boat left. And that was the last boat because the airport was bombed. I mean, there was no way at that point, April 30th, Neil, the only way you can escape or leave is by that boat. Now, when we got there, of course, we couldn't find each other, but we had to push the fence and the gazillions of people. And we went to that point when my mom says to wait. And I think that's miracle number 1. We found each other. We were 15. Scattered. Motorbike, bicycles, scooters, and car. And we met. We found each other. So that was the first miracle for me. And when we got to that edge, when my mom says to wait, well, the boat already left. We could see the boat. So between us and that boat, we couldn't swim. And so I think at one point my parents said, wait here. My mom told all of us to wait there, and they had to go find a way to get us to catch that boat. I know I was 8 years old, and I was just standing there, and I was so afraid. And you know how sometimes you're afraid, but you can't speak. Nothing comes out of your mouth. And I was just standing there, and I remember imagining, what if what if somebody shoots me? Like, this is the kind of frame of mind I was in. But I couldn't say anything. All I knew is I had to be good and not cry and not complain and just stand there and wait for mom and dad and, with my brothers, sisters. But I was imagining, what would it feel like if a bullet would go through me? Like, it was horrible. But anyways, so my parents found a man with a small boat and paid them everything they had, with the Vietnamese dong, which probably wasn't worth much the next day, but so that man took 15 of us to go catch up with that big boat. And that big boat, the name is Trường Xuân. And so when we caught up to that boat, there were so many people already. And the captain kept saying, no more, no more. But people didn't listen. They were trying to climb, it's like a rope. It's like a ladder, but it's a rope. And so we were trying to get onto that boat. And I still remember my mom. My mom is my hero. My mom is always the last one. She always makes sure that we're there, we're safe, and then she would go. And I remember at one point, her body was between the big boat and the last boat, like on the ladder. And we were screaming because we didn't want her to fall into the water. So this is the kind of things that I remember, Neil, on that day. I think sardines have more space in their can than us on that boat. Because once we got onto the boat, we had to find a little corner, and there were so many people. So you were just sitting there like this, and you can't move. You just sit there. And then from there on, it was praying and hoping that the boat would start moving because it had mechanical problems. And we knew that. We knew what we were getting into. But we took a chance. My parents took a chance. I was just 8, scared.
So I wanted to go back just a little bit. So it's in this scene, right? Because for the listeners here who maybe don't know, where was the port? For my knowledge, it was in District 4, right? So can you explain a little bit for the people who live in modern Saigon like me? What did Saigon look like then? Where was the port? Because then people can start to visualize, compare it to modern Saigon.
If I had a map right now, it would help. I can't tell you exactly. Yes, I believe it's in District 4, but we live in the city. So Nguyễn Thông would be in District 1. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it it's like 30, 45 minutes. I would say by scooter. I was on a scooter, so it would take longer than the car. And my brothers were on their bicycle. So we all took different routes. And it was so chaotic, Neil. On the street, people were screaming. People were trying to, because the parallel is funny, Neil. While we were trying to get out of the country, well, the tanks, were coming in. So it was, I think back, and we were trying to escape, and the tanks were coming in to celebrate the reunification. But to answer your question, yeah, we live in the city in District 1, and to get to the port, it's a good 30 minutes car ride. And I was geek, so I...
Yeah, I know I'm asking you questions. I don't remember what I did last week, never mind what happened when I was 8 years old. But what was it like then for you growing up during the war? Like what? Because do you know what? It's this pandemic. I've often compared this pandemic as my equivalent to living through a war, right? Because I've had a pretty easy life my whole life. I've never had to live through any type of conflict or war in my in the countries that I've lived. So I've had it pretty easy, and this pandemic is obviously challenging for everyone. So I kind of compare it to like, well, there's people that are older than me that have lived through a war, and I just can't. But so what I try and kind of find some comfort during this pandemic is to think about, even during a war, which would be obviously absolutely horrible, was life kind of normal most of the time, and the war was just something that was going on in the background, or is it something that literally affects you day to day, minute by minute in your life?
We'll be right back.
Join pilot and adventurer Fernando Pino as he takes you on journeys to discover exciting destinations across the UK and Europe. You'll fly with him to hidden gems and experience local culture, from bustling streets to serene hideaways and the best places to eat, sleep, and play. Travel Plans is more than a podcast. It's your ticket to exploring the world and its history with a friend. In this episode, we are flying to discover a beachside paradise perfect for the whole family. Discover golden sands, activities galore, and even free childcare so you get your own break too. Why am I still here?
Well, we left on April 30th, Neil, in 1975, but many months before that, it had started. Like we started to hear, I guess, on TV, and heard my parents talking. And even I remember at school, like maybe around February, March 1975, I remember this one day we were at school, and I went to private school. And all of a sudden, our teacher said, go hide under the table because we can hear the planes. We can hear the bombing and the gunshots. It sounded far, but it's at the same time, it sounded near enough. So I remember moments like that where we had to go hide under the desk in our classroom when we heard those planes. And a few weeks before April 30th, 1975, we were not allowed to go out on the street because we can hear the loudspeakers, with someone, the army or the government, saying that under no circumstance should you go out on the street, stay in your house. So I was only 8 years old, but it was scary to know that we're not allowed to go out. And you know how it is. You live in the family. I mean, I have 7 brothers, sisters. My parents are always whispering, talking. Even if they're not explaining to us the situation, I can see it, the nonverbal, right? I can see it in their face. I can feel that they are worried. And so later on, I found out that my mom actually tried to leave a month before, in March 1975. But when she asked around, people say, forget it. You have too big of a family. It's going to be hard to get a plane or get a boat. So, but people discourage her from leaving. But on that morning, April 30th, we had an angel. Well, we call him, sorry, I speak French, so un ange gardien, a guardian angel. So this man called my dad, and he said he's a friend of a friend, and he's calling to let my dad know that if you guys still want to leave the country, there's one boat, only one. So go check it out. Like he's not sure because he's in the countryside, but he says, go check it out. And so my parents listened to that advice. And so they got all of us to leave, but they are not even sure themselves, Neil, that we were going to be able to get on that boat or find that boat. And so that's when my parents we didn't have any suitcase. I was in my pajamas. And we left and we didn't know. We just thought, okay, we're going to go and probably it's not going to work out and we're going to come back. So that was the frame of mind that we had. And when we got there, we just jumped on the opportunity. My mom today has chills when she thinks about it because the danger that she put her family in, we could have lost each other. Because it happened to some families, you scattered, you split, and then you don't find each other, and one get on the boat, the other one stays behind. So there's horrible stories like that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting goosebumps right now from you just telling me this. So, I mean, I can't imagine what your mum feels. And Tracy's, maybe have you listened? Hers was a similar story that her family escaped after 1975, but in 3 different trips. And somehow by a miracle, they all ended up making it safely to the US. So I know that was a common thing, but it makes me, as I was saying to you, that is the pandemic similar to a war? I thought to myself, Neil, you sound like an idiot. Of course it's not. And as you described what you went through, and even this one moment, it's not even close really to what we are going through in terms of like that absolute, these crucial moments of life or death. But then again, maybe am I being just an idiot again as well, because there are people during this pandemic that are going through life or death moments, maybe just because I haven't done it myself or seen it doesn't mean that it isn't happening. But my next question, I was going to ask you about that situation. From what you described to me there about you being on the boat and like sardines, and this was something that came up in the news a lot. When you saw what happened in the fall of Afghanistan and the Taliban coming back, and we saw all the refugees on the planes and stuff, did that bring back a lot of memories?
Definitely, definitely. Like even a few years ago, with the Syrian, do you remember? Yeah, I was on the news a lot, being interviewed about how I felt, seeing all these people stuck on a boat and no one's helping them. So to give you a bit of more information, because you need to understand that boat part, and you will understand how when every time I see refugees, boat people, the war, it brings everything back. I am sitting here today. I've been in Quebec, Montreal since 1975, June. I'm 55 years old. And every time people ask me to tell the story, I feel like I just lived it yesterday. That's how much it stayed in my memory. So let me bring you back, Neil, just for a second on that boat. Okay. So we got on that boat. And so for 3 days, yes, 3 days, 2 nights under the sun, no water, no food. Like I said, we all got on that boat and we didn't know all we knew is we just wanted to go away, go toward what they call international water to be safe. But of course, the boat had mechanical problems and we were way too many people. The capacity of that cargo, of that boat, was about 500 and we were 4,000. So I'll let you imagine what it's like. Now, on that boat, there was a man next to me who, I don't know if he's a spy or what he was, but he shot himself in the head. I had his brains on me. Now, okay, so we kept fainting. Because we had no food, we had no water. And so he shot himself and I had blood on me and I passed out. I fainted. And I remember when I woke up, I had nothing on me. And I told my mom, I said, there's a man. He heard him, and my mom kept saying, no, it was a nightmare. It's okay. Go back to sleep. You're fine. What she did is she wiped everything clean while I passed out so that it would not affect me. This is what my mother did. So the boat was sinking on the second night. And I remember, hearing the prayers. It was, I think back and it was quite beautiful. It was scary. It was beautiful being with these thousands of people on the boat praying because we all thought we were dying. Some people jumped, they suicided, but, water started coming in. And then that morning, on the third morning, a boat came to rescue us, a Danish boat called Clara Mask. You see this boat and you think you're dreaming because you haven't eaten anything, you haven't drank for 3 days. So you think, okay, maybe I'm hallucinating. But this big boat came and rescued us. And I remember everybody panicked on our boat. And I remember seeing kids being stepped on. And because everybody wanted to get on that big boat. And once again, my mother, I don't know how she how she stayed so calm. And today I know how this woman is packed with resilience and courage. And that's why she's my hero. So she told us, she paired us up 2 by 2 and she says, okay, go on that big boat and we're going to meet up there. I don't know about the thing about splitting up and meeting up, but it seems to work. So she paired us up and because she knew that if we stayed as a cluster, we're all going to, probably being stepped over or so she told us to go 2 by 2 and we meet up on that boat. So that Danish boat actually picked up the SOS signal. I don't know how, but I found an interview with the captain on YouTube. I can send it to you if you want. He was quite emotional because when they found our boat and they see these thousands of people probably looking really sick because we didn't eat and we were so thirsty and we were so tired. So they rescued us and they took us to the closest island, and that was Hong Kong. Now, we made it to Hong Kong and the Chinese said, you're not coming in. They said, go away, go back where you came from. And this is the part where I can relate to other, the Syrian people, both people. And so the Queen Elizabeth was visiting Don't ask me, but she was there on May 2nd, 1975. She was visiting Hong Kong, and she told the Chinese authority, you cannot do this. It's not humane. You have to let them in. So I remember being on that big boat for it feels like it was a whole day to wait for the Chinese authority to open up a refugee camp of some sort so that we can step off the boat. But we were happy. And I've never seen so many blonde people with blue eyes and green eyes. It's a Danish boat with a lot. So it was, and we had cookies, we had milk. To me, it felt like Christmas. And we knew that we were safe now, but we just wanted to be on land. We didn't want to be on the boat anymore. And so my next couple of months was in a refugee camp, more like a prison camp. If you ask me, we were not allowed to go out. We had to line up, and every day we had brown rice for morning, lunch, and supper. And, until today, I cannot eat brown rice. I know it's healthier, but I cannot touch brown rice because I ate a lot of that. So we were in that camp for a couple of months. And I remember UNHCR coming in and helping us to see if we can apply to go to another country. And Australia and US actually said yes. But my parents, they wanted to wait for Canada. I guess they were networking at the camp, and they heard that Canada was a good country and we can speak French there. They understood French a little bit. And so they were waiting for Canada to accept us. And so, June 17th, I arrived in Canada, in Montreal, and that was my new chapter, my new home, my new life.
Amazing, incredible. Yeah, that's what really touched me. Obviously, I'm just in awe here hearing this. It's amazing that your parents had the foresight to be choosy at that point and be picky and be like, no, we don't want to go to Australia. No, America, no. We're waiting for Canada. We're gonna wait. We're gonna wait.
I know, right? My mom has chills today. She says she doesn't know what she was thinking. What if Canada didn't take us? Then we'd be stuck in that refugee camp. And I'll tell you, Neil, I went back to live in Hong Kong to help the refugees later on in my life. And I met people who actually gave birth to their kids and met their spouse in the camp. So that could have been my parents. That could have been us. I could have been stuck in that camp in 1997. With a husband that I found in the camp and kids born in the camp. So it's not a laughing matter. My mom took incredible chances, and thank God.
Maybe I'll reach out to Sarah Nguyen from Nguyen Coffee Supply, who's been on the podcast before, and she shared her parents' story. And if my memory serves me correctly, which my memory is not very good, but if my memory serves me correctly, her parents met in a refugee camp. They were in a refugee camp for several years. Oh, no, sorry. What it was, they were actually in the same refugee camp in Hong Kong for several years, but didn't meet until they got to America and then found out that they'd actually been in the same refugee camp.
Wow, that's cool.
But yeah, so I think that's a common thing, because if you're there for a long time, obviously you're going to build relationships with people. And so what was it like then when you got to Canada? So how you were in the refugee camp for 2 months, did you say?
Almost 2 months, yeah. 7 weeks, I think. I know that I arrived on May 2nd and we left on June 17th. So yeah, I guess you do the math.
Do you have many memories from being in the refugee camp, or was it just boring? Was it just the same thing day after day? Like what happened there?
You know the thing, Neil, about being 8 years old, and I feel so lucky that I was 8 because I have 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters, and I think it affected them a lot more than me. And I have 2 younger brothers. So when you're 8 years old, even on that boat, when we left during the chaos, for me, it was like, I'm going to school today. I'm going on a boat, which is an adventure in itself. And so I think there's something magical about that age. And so for me, it's in the refugee camp. I didn't like the brown rice, but I was running around. I met kids and we managed to, put our hands, because the fans were, my hands were small enough that I was able to put the hands out, and then people would give me candies, like strangers passing by, because we're not allowed to go out of the camp. And I think people donated clothes and toys, because I remember once a week we got to go to that hut, and then there was lots of clothes and toys that we can pick. So, I look at it from the lens of an 8-year-old child. I was safe. I had mommy and daddy, and I had my brothers, sisters, my aunts. So I felt safe. But today that I'm a mother and I have kids, I can't imagine what my parents must be so worried, because granted, we're not on a boat and our life is not in danger. But what about the future? Both my parents they were professionals in Vietnam. My dad had a business and my mom was a director of a health center. So they had a good life, a really good life. And so for them to all of a sudden being in this camp and not knowing what is the next step, what's going to happen to our kids, I can't even imagine what was going through their minds. They must be freaking out. If you can see that. And so, but life for me was, I'm a kid running around and, I meet other kids. But I remember the day that we were going to the airport, because my parents explained that, okay, we're going to Canada. And I'm like, what is Canada? Who cares? I'm getting on a plane. Again, I'm 8 years old. Life is an adventure. I'm going to discover. And I'm a curious child. I'm very curious by nature. So for me, it was like, okay, more fun coming up. So I remember coming to Montreal, and it was June 17. Again, seeing all these Caucasian people, because in the camp, we're all Vietnamese, and, we had to share like a tiny space. I think we had one bed for 10 people. It was just, that was life in the camp. But now we're coming to Montreal, and I think our status was refugees, and the government gave us a hotel room for 2 weeks. Oh my God, we were running around. People gave us cookies and candies. It was just, to me, it was fun. It was fun. But like I said, I was 8 then. Now I'm putting myself in my mom's shoes, and I'm thinking, this poor woman, oh my God, 8 kids and a husband, and she doesn't know what are we going to do next with our life. And that was...
So at what age then, so I assume then you've spoken to your mother about this trip, or have you ever actually spoke to her about it? At what age did that happen?
Okay. Okay, so growing up here, we don't talk about this, Neil, and this is very normal. Many Vietnamese people, Viet Kieu, if you will, once they make it out, you don't talk about it. But I'm just going to talk about my family. It's a subject we don't talk about. So I don't know if you must know Vietnam by now, the culture. Vietnamese parents are very tiger parents. So I think tiger mom, I think that's something we call a Vietnamese mom who just want her kids to, succeed, good future, good school, high grades, and the whole shebang. So, over here, we don't talk about it. So my parents, we grew up very poor. Okay. So they had to look for a job because they left all their papers and degrees. And so they had nothing to prove that they were professionals. And on top of that, you have the culture, you have the language, and you have the weather. So, because I don't know, you remember Montreal?
Yeah.
Really cold in the winter. So my parents, while we were staying in that hotel for 2 weeks, they had to quickly go get help, because all we had was the clothes on our back. They didn't have a job. They had nothing, no money, no house, nothing. And my parents are very Catholic. They're not Buddhist, they're very Catholic. So my dad started to go to church and talk to the priests and people in the community. And so that's how they were able to find a small apartment. I just want to put you in a context. We were in a tiny apartment in a neighborhood that's not very, very, favored, poor. We were 10 people in a 5.5. And that means 3 kids in one room, 4 kids in another room. 5.5 means you have 5 different rooms, and half is the bathroom. So there's a kitchen, living room, and, 2 bedrooms and a half. So we were very tight, not as tight as the boat, but we were tight. And so we grew up very poor. I remember eating peanut butter for breakfast, for lunch, and for supper on a piece of newspaper, not a table, not chairs. So brown rice and peanut butter, 2 things I don't eat. Okay. I grew up eating peanut butter 3 meals a day. But you know what we had? We had my parents loving us. They come home. They each had 2 jobs, working in manufacturers, working any odd jobs. They couldn't work like the professionals that they were in Vietnam. They, did the kind of jobs just to put food on the table for the 8 of us. And Neil, we all went to university, to McGill. We're all professionals. And so our university diplomas are my parents' pride and joy. Okay.
Yeah.
They are so proud of us. But, to answer your questions, when we come here, we didn't speak French. We didn't speak English. We understood French a little bit because we all went to private school in Saigon. So we understood French a little bit. So yes, I was beat up at school because I couldn't speak the French that the kids in Quebec speaks. I don't know if you remember when you came to Montreal, the French here, it's a bit of a slang. It's different from the French in France. And so we had to learn really fast. I had to learn to adapt really fast. And so I used to come home. I didn't want to be beat up in the schoolyard anymore. So I used to hold a mirror and speak the French that they were speaking. Like, Colin, the bin, ben, no, de quoi tu parles, toi et puis moi. This is how they speak French. And I needed to make friends in the schoolyard. And I love languages, so it wasn't hard for me. So yes, I became quite popular in my school because I was able to speak like them, play like them, and mingle in. And that's my victory, by the way. Today I can speak English, French, Quebecois, Vietnamese. I masterpiece.
Well, that's good that you can still speak Vietnamese then. You didn't lose that. Is that the language that was spoken at home then, I would imagine?
That's a miracle. That's a miracle, actually, because my mom doesn't understand today that I can speak, I can read, I can write. Granted, my level is probably not my parents' level, probably high school level, but I was featured on television in Vietnam 3 times on VTC 10. Yes, 3 years ago. And my mom couldn't believe that I was speaking Vietnamese on TV. I mean, Vietnam people in Hanoi, my cousins and niece, they saw me on TV and they're like, oh my God, she speaks Vietnamese. So I don't know why, Neil. I think my attachment to my roots is very strong. And in my siblings, in my family, I'm the one who went back to Vietnam in 1995. I'm the first one to make peace with my past. This is what I shared with you in 1995 when I decided to go back. It scared my family. My parents begged me not to go. They said, please don't go, because they were scared. They don't know what happened to Vietnam and what's going to happen if I go. But I went. I'm very stubborn. And I went. It's quite an emotional roller coaster.
Well, it's something that has come up. And again, this is what's fascinated me and why I love this podcast. I've personally learned so much, and I hope my listeners have as well, that the people who left in 1975 or around that time, or many of them have never returned to Vietnam and won't, because for them, why would they want to return to something that was so traumatic? And from what I know from the next generation of Vietnamese people who I have interviewed, so off the top of my head, I remember like Nhi Mai, who's Swiss, was, Vietnamese parents and born in Switzerland. And when she told her family, like, oh, I want to go back to Vietnam, at first they completely were horrified at the prospect, because for them, and I know other people I've spoken to, it's the same. Their parents would just never, ever return here, because for them, it's such a traumatic time. So then when their children are then like, well, hey, I want to go back and explore my roots. But then what she explained, once her parents, and she could prove to her parents, it's a safe place. It's not like it was back then. It's completely different, real thriving culture, obviously, in Saigon, that then they could see why she did that. And I think, and again, my memory is so bad and we've had so many amazing guests on, but if I remember correctly, her parents eventually came to visit her and she was able to show that. But so that was going to be my next question. So then tell me about that transformative trip in 1995.
So in 1995, Neil, I was a project manager, an engineer, because that's my background. I'm an electrical engineer that I studied at McGill University, and I graduated with a bachelor in engineering. So in 1995, I was working at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Now, by then, I had traveled the world. That it came with the job. I traveled, I designed TV and radio studios, but I also traveled in the world for fun. That's one of the things one of my values, to travel and know people and eat their food and experience the planet. But in 1995, I was thinking, why don't I go to Vietnam? I've been to Europe, the US, I traveled. I want to go to Vietnam. And just that idea completely upset and freaked out my parents because they said, you are not going. And I kept saying, I'm going. So I bought my ticket and I went with my husband. At the time we were dating. He was my boyfriend, but and he's from Montreal. He's Scottish, Irish, Chinese, never traveled in Asia. So I sold him the idea that let's go to Vietnam. Now my parents said, don't go. And I said, I want to go. It's fine. I will be careful. And so this part will make you laugh, Neil. I said, okay, Mom and Dad, I'm going to go and I'll make sure that I'll go visit your family in the North. And that made them happy because right? So I sold them on that. And the second thing I sold them on, I said, I will dress like the locals. I will go very under the radar. And I asked my aunt to make me these brown pants and it's so ugly, right? But I figured I'm going to blend in. It's stupid because you look at my face when I'm there, Neil, they can tell that I'm a Viet Q, or at least actually they thought I was half. They didn't think I was Vietnamese. And this is a funny part. I'll tell you in a minute. So I convinced my parents that I'm not going to dress like here. I'm going to be really low key. I'll blend in. I won't give my passport. I'll hide it. I'm going to make up some excuse if people ask for my, like I list everything to make them feel like it's okay. And I promise I would not call them because that's expensive, but I will try to communicate with them in whatever shape and form I could as much as possible. So we got there. I believe it was December or January 1995. We arrived January 1995. I arrived at the airport in Nội Bài. Nội Bài is the airport of Hanoi. And it wasn't the airport as it is today, right? It was like a hut. And I remember getting there and my friends who traveled before me, Canadian friends, said, don't hide money because you might have to give some money. And I'm like, what? Anyways, I put $20 US in my sleeve and I went to the counter, gave the passport to the person. He wouldn't give it back to me. And I kept looking at him and he said, do you speak Vietnamese? And I lied. I said, no, I kept And in my mind, okay, is this the point where I give my $20? But then I kept thinking, no, I'm in my country, man. I mean, why? And so I stood there and eventually I got my passport back. And then that was it. So we come out of the airport and we got kidnapped. This is my
what?
dad. No, listen to this. My dad had written letters. Okay, I want to bring you to 1995. There's no social media, no email, no nothing. Okay, so my dad had written a letter to his nephews in a village in the north of Hanoi, and he didn't tell me. So we come out of the airport with our suitcase, and we had these guys grabbing us, taking our suitcase, pushing us in this car. And the car had no bottom, so we had to lift our legs. Otherwise, you would touch the street. Okay, so my husband was my boyfriend, today my husband, Brian was freaking out because he's like, who are these people? So then I quickly spoke Vietnamese. I said, who are you? And that's when the driver says, oh, I'm your cousin. Your dad sent us. Neil, I swear to you that I was in a movie. I was planning. You were like, what is happening? So then they took us to the village. And the whole time we had to hold our legs because there's not bottom. And the car, it was like one of these Russian cars, old cars, and there was no highway. So along the road, they had to honk so much because, I don't know, you see pigs, you see cows, it's crazy. It was, we were holding each other's hands so hard for blood circulation. And my husband Brian kept telling me, are we going to make it there alive? And I said, at this point, just pray, just hope. So we make it there and everybody came to greet us. All the little villages next to my dad's village, they came and they were touching my Brian. They were touching my boyfriend because they've never seen a tall guy. He looks Caucasian to them. Even if he has Chinese in his blood, he looks white. And so they were asking me 5 million questions and I had to go to everybody's house in the villages and have tea and they had no bathroom. So that was a huge challenge. Yes, I know you can laugh because you were not in my shoes. So, but it was emotional, Neil. So this is 1995. Okay. My first time back living that kind of experience, but I was crying at the same time because They were telling us about what happened after 1975 and how poor they are. And I can clearly see how poor they are. And I can see kids following me. The kids were wonderful. I took pictures of them, and they were just following us and touching us and hello, how are you, like, that's all they knew how to say. And it was so emotional for us. So yeah, so it's a lot of tea drinking, eating, and then giving them some money and then saying goodbye. So they sent one boy with us to protect us for the rest of the trip, and he had a sick low. I think he had a sick low or something. So we traveled from Hanoi all the way to Saigon, and we were supposed to be there for 5 weeks, Neil, and we only stayed for 3 weeks. And I'll tell you why. It was so emotional for me to see families after 20 years and them telling me all these horror stories. I couldn't take it after 3 weeks. So I cut my trip short after 3 weeks, and I told Brian, I said, take me somewhere where I don't speak the language, where I cannot understand. So we went to Bangkok. We went to Thailand. So we were supposed to be in Vietnam for 5, and we stayed for 3. And on my pictures, you see either I cry or I eat. So either Zoonie's eating or Zoonie's crying. So I had these swollen eyes, or I was eating because the food is so bloody good. Everything comes back to me, right? The smell, walking on the street and smelling, the sandwiches and the hams and the snacks. And all I did was crying and eating. Honestly, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like if you were to, your story about going out to the village and your husband's skin being touched and being fed tea, like this has not changed. Like for many people you still hear these same kind of stories that happen. So it's funny that all the way back then. It's interesting you talk about how poor it is being back in 1995, because recently I called out somebody on Facebook who was claiming that there were no obese children in Vietnam in 1995 because there was no McDonald's. And so I just quickly Googled and then to confirm, and I responded to him, and I was like, I think it's because in 1995, 50% of the population were living below the poverty line is why there was no obese children, not because there was no McDonald's. Like, let's not conflate these two issues. Vietnam had extreme poverty. So that must have been really difficult to see. And was that unexpected then?
Well, for me, I had friends, Canadian friends who traveled because they were teaching in Japan. So they showed me pictures of Vietnam, but obviously they showed me pictures of the beach. And so in 1995, when I went, I did not know I was going to be kidnapped by people in my dad's village. And so it was a shock. For me, it was a shock to go there and see how poor they are. They had homes, and my dad sends money. My parents send money, whatever they can. Half of it probably reached them, half not. I don't know where the other half goes, but let's not go there. But the kids were, it's cold, eh? It's cold in January in the north, as you know. And they had, scarf, and they had many layers. They ran around barefoot. And so I see things like that. And it really shocked me, especially because I come from Montreal and I grew up here, and, it's Canada, man. I mean, you're no matter where you go, you can still get help. And so I've never seen that. So 1995, when I go there, I came back, and that's why I was crying so much. And I think that was the beginning of me wanting to do something to help Vietnam. So that seed was planted in my head, because before 1995, Neil, I was this project manager. I had the best career, 5 weeks vacation, working for a big corporate and corner office, traveling. I had a really good life. And in my mind, I was going to be vice president of engineering. I was, I had a good career. But seeing what I saw in 1995, it kind of, really puts the perspective back in your life and your ambition. So when I came back from that trip, I was thinking, oh my God, when you stand in a supermarket here, you have millions of cereal boxes and cookies, not millions, but so many.
Yes.
And in Vietnam, I mean, they I see people looking through garbage, or it's day and night. And that trip really brought me back down to grounded me. So when I came back, I think my ambition was not the same. I didn't care about, that going up the corporate ladder or becoming a VP engineering. I was thinking, what is it that I can do? What is it that I can do in my life? So this is 1995. And in 1997, I resigned. You know, I resigned. They didn't understand. I was promoted all the time. I was one of the best. And I quit my job because I wanted to move back to Vietnam. So I convinced my husband, because by then Brian and I were married. And I said, Brian, can you see if your work can give you a contract in Vietnam? Because he works for Ericsson, big company in telecommunications. So we asked, and they said, no, we don't need you in Vietnam. However, are you interested in Hong Kong? And my husband, being half Chinese, quarter Scottish, Irish, he says, okay, yeah, let's try Hong Kong. So he asked me, do you want to move to Hong Kong? And I said, okay, close enough to Vietnam. Let's go. So you know what? We sold everything. I quit my job. My families and friends were so sad, but I said, I need to do this. I need to listen to that voice inside of me and go back to Vietnam and see what is it that I can do. So we moved to Hong Kong. And we were expats for 3 years, almost 3 years. My son was born, Connor. Connor is my son, and he's made in Hong Kong. He was conceived and born in Hong Kong. And while we were in Hong Kong, I had no jobs. I accepted to go there, and I accepted to, be there. My husband was working. So 2 weeks into living in Hong Kong, I'm going to make you laugh, Neil, again. We were living in a hotel. Because, the company was shipping our stuff by boats, right? So we were living in a hotel, waiting for our stuff to arrive and finding a place. And so I was, just walking around Hong Kong with a t-shirt, jeans. I didn't look like, I looked like a tourist, I think. So I walked into this really nice furniture store in, I think in Repulse, no, near Wan Chai. And I wanted to buy this beautiful coffee table. And the owner tapped on my shoulder and asked me to leave. And I didn't speak any Chinese, but I'm like, what? No, I like this table. And she said something, but I understood like, no, you are Ama. Like she thought I was Filipino nanny. She says, you cannot afford this. Go. Like she posted me out of the store.
Wow.
And I didn't understand. I'm like, but I want this. And that was my first experience. So all of a sudden, you know how you move to a new country? I'm sure you went through that with your wife. That honeymoon period when you're like, oh, wow, I'm here. There's so much to discover. When that killed it for me. Then after that day, I'm like, oh boy, did I make the right decision?
Yeah.
No problem. But it's okay. I went to another store. I got another table. So
I was going to say you should have done like a pretty woman moment, walk back in with your husband and put your credit card down and be like, no, I want that table. And like, shake the woman.
I did. I didn't buy from her, but later on, I went back with a friend and we were going out that day to Lang Kwai Fong and we were well dressed, jewelries and all dolled up. And I walked in there and I said, do you remember me? I did that thing.
No way.
To understand that I wanted to buy from you, but you didn't sell it to me. I live in Repulse Bay with all the rich people and I back next door. I did tell her and her face just went like,
amazing. That's awesome.
So I did.
So from Hong Kong, then you moved back to Vietnam eventually, or you commuted between the two?
No, but I did something even better. So one day I was waiting for the subway in Hong Kong and I saw this magazine next to me. We were still living in a hotel. This is the third week. So I was looking at the magazine. It's for expats. It's in English. And then I go till the end where they had these job ads. And then I saw something that looking for project coordinator in refugee camp. I was so I thought it was so Twilight Zone. I closed it and I left it there. And then the subway arrived. So I was about to step in the subway, but I ran back and I grabbed the magazine and I went back to the hotel and I called that number and I kept hanging up. I hang up. I call, I hang up. The lady on the other side must think I'm crazy because I think after 3-4 times, she says, did you call and hang up? And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm nervous. And so I explained to her, she's British and she's the director for this organization called Treats. And I said, I saw your ad and I was a kid in that refugee camp. And that's why I'm so nervous to talk to you. So anyways, we had a conversation / interview and she says, we want to hire you. And I says, I will do it but only with the condition that you're not paying me. I want to do it as a volunteer, just pay for my transportation and whatever I need. And so I did that for a year, Neil. I worked in refugee camps and I recruited volunteers from Australia, France, Canada, America. I recruited volunteers to help me go into these refugee camps where I used to be. Like I went into the same refugee camp and I just stood there and I was 30 years old, right? 1997, I was 30 and I just stood there and I'm like, oh my God, it's still poor and these people are still there and I could have been one of them. So this is where I think I had a bit of closure and I decided to pour all of my efforts as a project manager into helping them, taking the kids out. So I did all kinds of activities and that was the year that 1997 to 98. And we witnessed the handover, it's the second.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris Patton, right? That was the governor. Was that right?
Yes. But that's amazing for me. Doing that kind of work brought peace back into my life. And I got to make so many friends. So while my husband was working, really hard because he was like in marketing or, with Ericsson Hong Kong, I was doing, the other thing, taking the kids out, giving them food, helping them, creating educational program with the volunteers for them, taking mothers to hospital to visit their kids. It's things like that I did, which is completely opposite from the kind of career I had in Montreal. But that really fulfilled like something that was missing in here. And it allows me to, have closure with my past. And so I didn't move to Vietnam. I did visit Vietnam during my stay in Hong Kong, but just doing that kind of work for the Vietnamese refugees in Hong Kong, it was enough. It was enough for me, and, once I had my son, we decided to move back because our families are here and I wanted him to have Canadian roots.
Mm-hmm.
So we
moved. What an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing. That is, I'm excited to see when they make the movie of your life, put it that way. It's so interesting.
Thank you so much. No, but all of that, everything I'm telling you, it's that little seed that I planted in my own head until I decided one day that, okay, I've been working with women entrepreneurs in Montreal, Canada. Why don't I go and share a bit of that in Vietnam? Because I kept thinking all this time, I'm 55. So 3 years ago, I thought to myself, I wonder what would it be like if I stayed in Vietnam? Would I have become an entrepreneur, a speaker, a coach, a mentor? And so that curiosity pulled me. And so I had the idea one day, why don't I go and make a documentary movie in Vietnam? Again, this completely shocked everybody in my community because they said, why Vietnam? You are doing well here. You have so many women you're helping. But I told them, I said, I want to connect Vietnam and Canada, the two countries that really made me who I am today. So I want to go and shine the light on Vietnamese women. And Neil, when I went, I had nobody to interview. This is why I called the movie How She Dares. I called it How She Dares because I was thinking about the women who are daring with their courage in Vietnam. But then at the end of the day, I'm the one who kind of dared to go to jump and trust that the net will appear once I jump. And that's the kind of, personality that I have. And that's why I'm fit to be an entrepreneur because I can jump, trusting that only if you jump, something will happen. You have to take the risk. So I took the risk to go to Vietnam. I did a quick, crowdfunding campaign. I got a few $1,000s so that I can go. So we were 3 women, me, Camille Laurent, a famous YouTuber from France, and my daughter Maggie, who never set foot anywhere but Disneyland, who doesn't speak Vietnamese. And so the 3 of us decided to go and interview 7 women. So when we made it to Saigon that night, I went on social media and I looked Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, everywhere. And I started to look for women that I considered were brave enough to switch career, to start this social enterprise, to do something for Vietnam. And along the way, I found the 7 women. When I went, I had nobody. So I have to say, social media is just amazing to help you connect, with people.
Yeah.
And, I hope one day maybe you'll invite some of those women onto your podcast.
Yeah, definitely connect me.
Yeah, one is from Da Nang, Helen, a YouTuber.
Okay.
She's a famous YouTuber for food in Vietnam. And I was in.
Yeah, no, it's all about connections. I don't know if this is well known. Maybe I just say that because I live here and I see it, but from everything you've described, from the first moment you've started speaking to describing your mom and yourself and your life, Vietnamese women are so strong. It is incredible. And I worked at a company here and it kind of blew me away. Nearly, I think 9 out of the 10 senior managers, including the CEO, were all female, which I don't think would happen in many other countries. And I don't know what other companies are like because I've only really worked for one big company here. But at this company, it was run by women. And I thought about this just recently, actually, right? So it's this might make you laugh. I thought about all the Vietnamese people that I've interviewed on this podcast, whether they're Vietnamese overseas or they're Vietnamese born and bred. And I was like, Neil, you've interviewed so many women. And so now it's on my radar. I'm trying to find Vietnamese men to interview. And now, look, I'm not saying that there's not Vietnamese men doing like amazing things. I'm sure they are. But when I open my eyes and when I cast the net or when I'm looking for guests, it always seems to be a Vietnamese woman who's just doing incredible things, whether it's Tracy Nguyen Mang at Vietnamese Boat People or Sarah Nguyen with the Nguyen Coffee Supply or yourself with your documentary and your movie, and then go back through all these guests that I've had. Levy Oy, who's now a kind of international DJ, Nhi Mai, who's come here and now has a YouTube channel. And you think, so again, I always think everything's from your own perspective, right? So maybe I'm just narrowed. I only have a narrow perspective on that. And I'm sure Vietnamese men are incredible as well. So I never want to be seen to be putting anyone down. But I think even from this conversation just reaffirms everything your mum did, that Vietnamese women are badass and they do incredible things.
You know what? Even me, Neil, I'm surprised when I go back. You know, when we were there, I remember we were in, and so we took one of these, I don't know, this long boat. And you know how the lady is just like, rowing. We were like 5 or 6 sitting in there with no gears.
Yeah, I've done that as well, yeah.
And she is like slim and just rolling and smiling. I kept turning back. I tried to do it. Forget it. I would break my shoulder.
Yeah.
I don't know. So when you talk about strength, I know what you mean, but it same here. And I'm a Vietnamese woman. And every time I go back to Vietnam, and I've been many, many times, I'm always amazed at how strong they are mentally, emotionally. I think it's the small country, Vietnam, had been so pursued by so many other countries, the Japanese, the Chinese, the French, I don't know who else went. And I think what it did to the people, if you ask me, it made them strong and resilient, always ready to build up again. And the women, I think it's always about, selling something, starting something. And when I interviewed them, I asked, how come more women learned English to do business? And they said, oh, the men, they're so lazy. They just sit there fucking drink. I don't want to say that all men are like that. I'm telling you what the women.
No, I think it's probably quite a lot of truth to that. Absolutely. And I was going to say, I kind of mentioned I'm a comedian and I put on comedy shows. So I work a lot with people in the food and beverage industry here, people that put on restaurants. And even as we're talking, I'm thinking about it. Nearly every restaurant manager that I deal with, that I work with, is a Vietnamese woman. There's very few Vietnamese men that I come across with anyway. So again, this is only from my perspective, so I don't know if it's true or not. But they're all these young, strong Vietnamese women. And what makes me laugh as well, and you probably have noticed this as well, many of the establishments here that are run by always a male expat, who often then have their Vietnamese partner. Who's the one that really runs the business though? And because when I talk to them, and I know a lot of them, and they'll be like, oh no, it's my wife is the one that's incredible. My wife is the one that gets things done, So yeah, it's definitely
I hear you. One of my nieces is in Hanoi, and her husband, 3 kids, they are running, the pandemic hit them a little bit, but before the pandemic, they were quite successful. They were selling things online, equipment, and she was the marketing salesperson. So the phone rings, it's her. But Bao is the one who fixes things. And so I think that's the typical couple. So she would be in the front communicating. She's learning English online. She does all the social media, the ads, and he would do all the technical stuff in the back.
I like that you're giving the meal some credit. Now that's good of you. So Zoonie, thank you so much. I was so excited for this interview when I learned a bit about your background, and you are more compelling and captivating than I could have imagined. So thank you so much for sharing this story with me and with our listeners. You've given, as I said, the Vietnamese boat people and the refugee crisis from 1975 and after is something that has come up really often. And to hear your in-depth story of what you actually went through is incredible. And it gave me shivers for most of the time you were talking, because I just can't imagine that you went through that. But it's really beautiful that you have this mind. You were at that lucky age of being 8 years old. So it was just a big playground. Obviously, I'm sure it would have been much more difficult for your parents and your family. And so I hope that they are safe and well and happy with the life that they managed to get to. So that's really, really encouraging. So before we go to I'm going to ask you the final questions that I ask everyone at the end of every episode. Tell anyone listening, how can they follow you, find you, support you? What's next with the documentary? Tell people all about you.
Okay, well, again, thank you, Neil. If ever I forget, thank you again for this amazing opportunity. It's always nice for me to be able to share my voice and my story like this. But the purpose behind my documentary project, which is really a personal passion project. And so it's taking, I almost don't want to get it out there because I'm holding on to it because I keep adding and adding more things to it. And what I realize is that there's also space for me in this movie to add my story. And that's why it's taking so long. I want to bring in the identity that you lose along the way when you move to another country. It doesn't matter if you're both people or you're a third country kid, but if you move to something outside of your comfort zone, then, the movie is just to find back your voice and use that voice. So the purpose of How She Dares, my documentary project, is really to inspire women around the world and men, anyone.
We need to inspire more men. They're useless. The women are doing fine. We need to inspire more men.
Yes, no, because, you have a sister, you have a wife, or you have a mother, like anybody, So for me, I want to encourage women to find their voice and use their voice. Because, when you're a baby, the first thing that gave you, power is when you let out that voice. And I found my voice and I used it to be a speaker, to train, to teach, to mentor, to coach. But I'm using that voice to help others find their voice. And so this movie, How She Dares, is really about that. Inspire you to dare, to be brave, to be courageous, to find your path, own it, and embrace it. And that's what it's about. And I started with Vietnam because it's so part of me. That's why. But I'm making more. I'm going to make more documentaries. But I wanted to start with my country, with my beloved Vietnam.
When is it coming out?
Next year.
Next year.
Because I'm still in the post-production, adding more stuff to it. But next year, I intend to travel. I'm vaccinated and I have faith that I will be able to travel again next year because I'm invited in Vietnam. Hanoi University, the dean asked me to come and lecture and share my journeys. And so I would love to show this movie in the Women Museum in Hanoi. I want to travel in Vietnam and just share this movie with women entrepreneurs and everybody in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So that's the goal, How She Dares. I created a Facebook page. Yes. So, just Google Zoonie Nguyen and How She Dares and online.
Well, for anyone who's watching or listening, just remember, I'll put the link in the show notes in the description. So make sure you go check that out. Follow it on Facebook, and we will look out for when you can come back to Vietnam, because we are hearing that international travel may resume next year, which is very, very exciting. So if you can make it here, I'll be here waiting and we can definitely catch up. So I'll ask you the questions I ask everyone at the end of each episode. First one, if you were in Vietnam right now and you could jump on the back of a bike, where would you go?
I would go to Nam Ha, which is the village near Nam Ding, where my dad is from. I would go there. I find peace there. I find families, and the kids are running after me when I'm on the bike, and it feels like home. So I would get on a bicycle, not a motorbike. I don't know how to use a motorbike, but I love bicycles, and I would be cycling around the village in Nam Ha.
Awesome. I love that. That's a great answer. Now, we keep obviously COVID and quarantine and all of this lockdown chat to a minimum, but we've all gone through the most difficult times of our lives and we've all experienced lockdowns at some point. What was the most challenging thing about lockdown for you?
I mean, aside not being able to hug my parents and my husband's parents, I think that's what I find the hardest in COVID, to not be able to be with families and hug them in your arms. But now we're all vaccinated, so it's better. But aside from that family and personal side, I really, really miss traveling and meeting people. And we could have a coffee right now, face to face, Neil, but I'm happy to see you on my screen. It would be even better to see you in 3 dimensions and to travel. And, I used to travel and give keynotes and speeches, and I love Zoom, but it's not the same.
No.
So, so that I find that tough.
Yeah. Well, what has been the best thing about lockdown for you?
Well, funny enough, thanks to Zoom, or thanks to, all the platforms that allow us to connect, the best thing I would say is that it gave me more time. It gave me more time because I don't have to travel. I can travel online and just hop on Zoom or, Meet or Google or Skype. And then, it takes a few seconds and that's where I am. So I think it's, my mindset is different now. I mean, because it's been almost 2 years, we don't have a choice. So, the best thing is that it gave me more time, and more time also to be with my families, because before that, we're everywhere. We're not at home. And and meet people like you and Lourdes. And I'm so, so grateful. Very grateful.
Yeah. Well, you've got to find the positives, and there have been positives throughout this, and the connection with people from around the world has been a really big one. Same for me as well. And I spoke to somebody recently who said to me that they've actually spoken to their parents more during lockdown than at any other point in their life. So, things like that have happened, which is nice. Now, next question. What in Vietnam shocks you the most?
This is going to sound corny, but the amount of bikes, motorbikes, it still shocks me. It still shocks me. And I was there in 2019 before the pandemic, and sitting in the back of a Grab or my cousin's motorbike, every time I'm amazed at the amount of bikes are like next to me. Like I still feel like I'm in a dream. It just feels so real to me. So that still shocks me for some reason.
I mean, I've been here 5 years and it still shocks me as well. So, I mean, it shocks me most because we were in lockdown for so long and now I've gotten back on the bike and we can travel. And you forget how crazy it is when I see like a bike coming towards me, driving down the wrong side, or the bike just takes a U-turn in the middle of the highway and decides that they want to go the other direction. It's like, oh my goodness. So I'm still shocked by that every day. Now, what pleasantly surprises you about Vietnam the most?
There could be so many answers to that, I swear. But what surprises me, because 1995, when I went back, I didn't feel like I belonged. I really didn't feel like I belonged. In fact, people thought I was either Chinese, half. But now I'm back there and I feel like I belong. Viet Kieu or not, I feel like I'm part of the communities that I speak to or work with or collaborate with. And that surprises me, because if I think back about 1995, I kept thinking, oh my God, will they ever accept me back? Because I did not choose to leave. I was a kid, but now I'm here and I want to do things. I want to help you rebuild. I want to do amazing things with all the communities there. But now I'm pleasantly surprised that when I'm there, I'm just one of them.
Beautiful. What a beautiful way to finish a beautiful episode. Zoonie, thank you so much again for joining us on 7 Million Bites, a Vietnam podcast. It has been unbelievable to share your story.
Thank you so much, Neil. You are making my week. Imagine I'm starting Monday with Neil on 7 million likes. I'm going to be smiling for the rest of the week. And I want to share, I want to talk about this on my, in my communities, whenever you're ready and whenever I'm allowed to.
Please do. Please do. We're very proud of that. This little podcast it's been an amazing platform to share these stories. And
You nailed. It's amazing what you're doing. I really applaud, and I have so much respect for what you are doing. And especially, I just want to add this before we wrap up because, some of the Vietnamese, we made it out, like myself. But I find that, like, even in Montreal, some of the Vietnamese people, they are questioning why I'm doing this. Why am I making a movie? Why am I going back to Vietnam? Because for them, it's like, they left and they don't want to have anything to do with and having somebody like you to shine the light on us sharing our journeys, our stories, and talking about, what we're doing now to maybe help out and give back. I think it's just, there's no word. It's just amazing. So thank you for this, Ed.
you're very welcome. You put a big smile on my face as well. So thank you so, so much. So it's the start of your day in Canada. You have Monday morning. I have Monday night. Thank you so much again. And I will be definitely speaking to you in the future and hopefully seeing you next year.
Thank you, Neil. Have an amazing week.
You too. Thank you, Zoonie.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. We hope you enjoy hearing our guest stories. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the show and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you so much to our producer, Lewis Wright, for making sure the show sounds as good as possible for you. And also a big thanks to the 7 Million Bikes community members and everyone who supports us. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can join the community today. The link is in the description and you'll get free event tickets, free 7 Million Bikes face mask and invites to special member events. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I'm still ashamed to say this, TikTok. Most of all, if you can, please donate to Saigon Children's Charity or Blue Dragons Children Foundation's COVID Appeals. Remember, we have 6 seasons of stories to share with you, so check them out if you haven't already, and we hope you can listen to future episodes too, so you can laugh, connect, and discover. Cheers! I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease. And I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you are listening to this podcast.
As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.